She was just a hard-working waitress, invisible among the wealthy guests she served. One fateful night, an arrogant CEO mocked her, forcing her to sing in front of hundreds, expecting her humiliation. But when Emily opened her mouth, her trembling voice transformed into something extraordinary, so powerful, so pure, that the entire ballroom fell silent. What began as an act of cruelty turned into a moment that shook even the cold heart of the billionaire himself. Her song not only silenced laughter, but awakened memories, regrets, and a humanity he thought he had buried forever. Overnight, Emily's life changed. Fame, headlines, and the world's gaze followed her, while the CEO fought to earn back the dignity he had stolen. This is not just the story of a waitress and a billionaire. It's the story of courage, redemption, and how a single voice can silence an empire. The ballroom of the Grand Horizon Hotel glittered under golden chandeliers, filled with the hum of wealthy laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft notes of a jazz quartet. It was a night of celebration, where CEOs, investors, and city elites had gathered for the annual charity gala. For the staff working behind the scenes, however, it was chaos, waiters rushing with trays, cleaners polishing silver, and among them Emily, a young waitress with weary eyes but a graceful smile. Dressed in a simple black uniform with a white apron tied neatly, she moved carefully through the crowd, balancing champagne glasses with the ease of long practice. She had been working at the hotel for 3 years, invisible among the wealthy guests, though she often dreamed of another life. One where she wasn't just serving food, but using her real gift, her voice. Singing had once been her passion, something she shared with her late father at the piano in their small home. But those dreams had been buried under bills, responsibilities, and survival. Tonight, however, fate was about to force her gift into the light. The air shimmered with perfume and pride as Victor Harrington, one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, entered with his entourage. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a slick suit and the air of a man who had never once been told no. His reputation was notorious. Ruthless in business, arrogant in life, and cruelly amused by belittling those beneath him. Wherever he sat, attention followed. Tonight he wanted entertainment, and he would soon find it at Emily's expense. As Emily placed a tray on the side table, she caught Victor's gaze. His sharp eyes narrowed on her, and a smirk spread across his face. He raised his glass and called out, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "You there, the waitress!" Heads turned instantly, conversations pausing. Emily stiffened, heat rushing to her cheeks as every eye focused on her. She stepped forward nervously, tray still in hand. "Yes, sir?" she asked politely. Victor leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I hear this gala is supposed to be entertaining, but frankly I'm bored. Tell me, do you know how to sing?" His words dripped with mockery, and chuckles escaped from his companions. Emily froze, throat dry. I sing a little," she admitted softly, regretting it the moment the words left her lips. Victor's grin widened, predatory. "Wonderful. Then entertain us. Right here. Now." The room buzzed with surprise, disbelief sparking across the faces of the elite. A waitress singing? It was absurd, laughable even, and whispers rippled through the crowd. Emily's heart pounded. She looked around desperately for help, but the other staff avoided her eyes. "Sir, this isn't appropriate," she stammered, voice trembling. Victor's laugh sliced through the air. "What's the matter, afraid? Come now, it's just a song. Or are you only good for carrying trays?" His cruelty stung, and laughter spread among the guests, feeding on her humiliation. Emily's chest burned with shame, but beneath it a spark of defiance flickered. She remembered sitting at her father's old piano, his hand guiding hers, as he told her, "Your voice is a gift, Emily. Never let anyone make you ashamed of it." Her eyes welled, but she blinked away the tears. Slowly, she set down her tray, her hands trembling. Victor raised his glass in mock salute, his voice loud and taunting. "Let's see what our little waitress is made of." The musicians paused awkwardly, unsure if they should continue. The host of the gala shifted uneasily, but Victor's wealth and influence silenced any objection. All eyes remained fixed on Emily as she stepped forward, each footstep echoing in her ears like a drumbeat. Her knees felt weak, palms damp, but she forced herself onward, the whispers of the crowd growing louder behind her. This will be embarrassing. She's going to faint. Poor thing, he's making a fool of her. Their words sliced into her, yet something stronger held her in place. She mounted the small stage where the jazz band stood, the microphone looming like a challenge. She turned, facing the sea of polished faces, each one expecting her to crumble. Victor leaned back with a smirk, certain his cruel entertainment would succeed. Emily closed her eyes, shutting out the chandeliers, the mocking smiles, the arrogant CEO, and let herself remember the warmth of her father's voice, the safety of their tiny living room, the joy that singing once gave her. For a moment the noise in her head quieted, leaving only the sound of her own heartbeat. She inhaled deeply, steadying her breath. When she opened her mouth, the entire room braced for laughter. What they didn't know was that this waitress was about to deliver something that would silence every mocking whisper and leave even the arrogant CEO struggling to breathe. Emily's lips parted, and for a second nothing came out but a shaky breath. The ballroom hung in tension, the chandeliers above shimmering like watchful eyes, the silence sharpened by expectation. Victor smirked from his seat, swirling the ice in his glass, certain this little display would end in laughter. The guests leaned forward, some with amused grins, others with pity waiting for her humiliation. But then, soft as a whisper, her voice emerged. A single note, trembling at first, floated across the hall. It wasn't loud, but it carried, weaving its way past the polished tables and silk gowns, reaching every corner of the room. The laughter that had been bubbling moments before died instantly, caught in throats. The musicians glanced at each other, surprised, then instinctively picked up their instruments to back her, the piano laying a gentle foundation beneath her tone. Emily's voice grew stronger, steadier, each note spilling raw emotion, not practiced performance. She sang not to the crowd, not to the arrogant CEO who mocked her, but to the memory of her father, to the countless nights she had hidden her dreams beneath exhaustion, to the ache inside her chest that had never found release. Her voice carried sorrow and strength all at once, pure enough to cut through the thick air of wealth and pride that filled the room. Guests exchanged glances, jaws slack, glasses frozen halfway to lips. One woman covered her mouth, eyes glistening. Even the waiters stopped in their tracks, trays balanced awkwardly as they stared at their colleague transformed before them. This wasn't just a waitress singing, it was a soul baring itself to the world. Victor's smirk faltered. He leaned forward slightly, his arrogant posture unraveling as the sound pierced something deep within him. He had expected a shaky tune, a laughable attempt, but instead he felt something he hadn't in years: humility. Emily's voice reached inside him, dragging forth memories he had buried beneath power and wealth. He remembered being a boy in a small town, his mother humming lullabies as she worked herself to exhaustion, the sound of her voice the only comfort in nights of hunger. He remembered swearing he would never be poor again, building walls of steel and money around himself until nothing could touch him. But now, here in this glittering hall, the song of a waitress broke through the fortress he had spent decades constructing. The room around him blurred as her melody soared higher, aching and beautiful, like wings spreading wide. Emily opened her eyes briefly, catching sight of the stunned faces before her, but she didn't stop. For the first time in years, she felt alive, unafraid, as though her father's spirit stood beside her, urging her on. Tears threatened to spill, but she kept singing, her voice steady, filling every inch of the vast ballroom. The chandelier crystals seemed to vibrate with the resonance, the polished floor reflecting the power of her presence. By the time she reached the final verse, the hall was utterly silent, except for her song. No one dared breathe too loudly, as though afraid to break the fragile magic spun from her voice. And then, with a note that lingered in the air like a prayer, she finished. Silence followed, heavy and awestruck, the kind that comes not from absence of sound, but from hearts too full to respond. For a moment, Emily thought she had failed, that the quiet meant mockery building once more. She lowered her gaze, her chest heaving, ready to flee. But then, slowly, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was hesitant at first, but soon others joined, until the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Guests rose to their feet, some shouting, "Bravo!" others wiping tears from their eyes, their polished faces undone by a waitress's song. Emily stood frozen, overwhelmed, as the ovation thundered around her. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, they saw her. But one face mattered more than all the others. Victor Harrington sat motionless, his glass forgotten, his usually smug features softened, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He swallowed hard, as though the lump in his throat betrayed him, and for a moment Emily wondered if she had imagined it. The man who mocked her now sat broken, undone, not by power or defeat, but by a voice he never expected. Slowly, Victor rose to his feet. The applause quieted as everyone turned to watch the CEO, known for his arrogance, stand before the waitress he had humiliated. He clapped, steady and strong, his gaze locked on Emily. The room erupted once more, louder than before, the ovation now carrying his weight as well. Emily's heart pounded, tears spilling freely now as she gave a small bow. She wanted to melt into the floor, to escape the overwhelming attention. But she also knew something had shifted forever. Victor approached the stage, his footsteps measured, his expression unreadable. He stopped at the edge, looking up at her. For once, his voice carried no mockery, only sincerity edged with something raw. You silenced an entire room." Emily's lips parted, but no words came. She stood trembling, unsure if this was another trick. But his eyes betrayed him. They were damp, honest, vulnerable. The guests whispered among themselves, shocked to see Victor Harrington moved so deeply. Emily stepped down from the stage, her legs weak. Victor held out his hand, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, she took it. The applause roared again, echoing through the golden ballroom, not for wealth, not for power, but for a waitress who had dared to sing when mocked. Yet as their hands touched, Emily felt an unease beneath the triumph. The night was far from over. Fame, scrutiny, and judgment would follow her now, and the CEO who mocked her was not a man easily changed. She had silenced him tonight, yes, but what came next would test them both in ways neither could yet imagine. The applause still echoed in Emily's ears, long after the final note faded. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing, her hands trembling in disbelief at what had just happened. Moments ago, she'd been a nameless waitress carrying trays. Now the city's most powerful elites stood clapping for her, some with tears in their eyes, some stunned into silence. For a fleeting moment, Emily felt proud, alive, as though she had stepped into the life she once dreamed of. But the magic quickly gave way to the reality of flashing cameras and murmurs spreading like wildfire. The gala had been crawling with journalists eager for gossip, and they now found their headline. Phones were raised, pictures snapped, videos recorded. The story of a waitress silencing the rich with her voice was already racing across the internet before she even stepped off the stage. Victor Harrington, the man who had mocked her, remained at her side. His usual mask of arrogance was gone, replaced with an expression torn between awe and regret. His eyes, red-rimmed from emotion he hadn't expected, followed her every move. "You changed this night, Emily," he said softly, barely loud enough for her to hear. She blinked in shock at hearing her name. How had he known it? She realized with a pang that even in her humiliation, her name tag had betrayed her. She wanted to respond, but the host of the gala quickly approached, shaking her hand vigorously. That was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. "Where did you train?" Emily stammered. I didn't. I just sing sometimes." The host blinked, astonished, before turning to Victor. "Mr. Harrington, what a discovery. You certainly know how to find talent." The words were meant as praise, but Emily flinched. To them, it looked like Victor had orchestrated this moment, as though her humiliation was somehow his genius. The thought made bile rise in her throat. As the night ended, reporters swarmed the entrance of the hotel, their cameras blinding as they shouted questions. "Waitress turned star? Is Victor Harrington sponsoring her career? Was it a publicity stunt? Emily ducked her head, clutching her coat around her shoulders, desperate to escape. Victor stepped in front of her, shielding her from the barrage with his broad frame, his security clearing a path to the exit. He guided her toward a sleek black car waiting outside, but Emily shook her head, panic rising. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." He looked at her, startled. "Emily, please. You don't understand what's coming. The media will devour you. Just let me—" She cut him off sharply, her voice trembling with anger. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You wanted to make me a joke, and now you stand here acting like my savior. Don't pretend you care." Victor flinched, her words hitting harder than he expected. For a man used to controlling every room, her defiance stripped him bare. He stepped back, allowing her to push past him into the night. Emily walked quickly down the street, her breath coming fast, the echo of camera shutters still ringing in her ears. By the time she reached her small apartment, the story had already gone viral. Her phone buzzed with messages from co-workers, strangers, even old classmates. Some called her brave, others accused her of being part of a setup, and a few mocked her again, claiming her sob story was fake. Emily collapsed onto her couch, burying her face in her hands. This wasn't what she wanted. All she had done was sing because she refused to let him silence her. Now the world had turned it into a spectacle. Meanwhile, Victor sat in his penthouse staring at the city lights. The sound of Emily's voice replayed in his head, haunting him. For years, he had measured life in profits and victories, burying his past beneath skyscrapers and wealth. Yet one song had unraveled him. He poured himself another drink but left it untouched, wrestling with guilt. He had mocked her, crushed her dignity in front of hundreds, and yet she had risen, silencing him with nothing but honesty in her voice. He wasn't sure what cut deeper, the shame of his cruelty or the awe of her strength. The next morning, Emily arrived at the diner where she usually worked her day shifts. To her shock, a crowd had gathered outside. Strangers pointed, whispered, some even applauded as she hurried inside. Her boss pulled her aside immediately. "Emily, what happened last night? Reporters are calling, customers are flooding us. They all want the singing waitress. You've got lines out the door." Emily flushed, overwhelmed. She hadn't asked for this attention. She just wanted to do her job, earn enough to keep the bills paid and her mother cared for. But now every customer seemed to look at her differently. Some snapping pictures, others asking her to sing again. She avoided their requests, shaking her head. "No, please. I just want to work." But fame, once ignited, was hard to extinguish. That afternoon, Victor walked in. The diner fell silent as eyes followed him, whispers filling the air. The billionaire in a diner was news enough, but everyone knew why he was there. Emily stiffened, tray clutched tightly in her hands. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. Victor removed his sunglasses, his gaze steady. "To apologize. In person." The entire diner seemed to lean closer, waiting for her reaction. Emily's hand shook, but she held his stare. "An apology doesn't erase what you did." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "No, it doesn't. But I want to do more than apologize. Emily, you have a gift, and the world deserves to hear it. Let me help you," she scoffed bitterly. "Help me, or own me like you own everything else." He flinched again, her words sharper than any boardroom battle he had fought. But instead of retaliating, his voice softened. "You're right to doubt me. I've spent my life using people. But last night, you reminded me of something I lost. Let me prove I mean it." Emily stared at him, torn. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw him out and forget this nightmare. But another part, the part that remembered the silence of the ballroom, the faces transformed by her voice, wondered if maybe, just maybe, this twist of fate was bigger than her anger. She turned away, whispering, "If you really want to prove it, don't do it for me. Do it for the girl you tried to humiliate. Do it for her dignity." Victor's chest tightened. For the first time, he realized she wasn't asking for money or fame. She was asking for respect, for truth. And that was something he wasn't used to giving. But he would try, he had to. Because Emily Carter, the waitress who silenced a room, had already changed him more than all his billions ever could. The days following Victor's visit to the diner were a blur for Emily. Customers no longer came just for coffee and pancakes. They came for her. They whispered her name, begged for songs, shoved napkins in her hands for autographs, as though she were already a celebrity. For Emily, it was suffocating. She had never wanted the spotlight. She only wanted dignity. Fame felt like another cage, one built from flashing cameras instead of poverty. And yet Victor Harrington kept appearing, always in the background, always waiting. He didn't bark orders or flaunt his wealth anymore. He sat quietly in the corner booth, sometimes with coffee untouched before him, as though willing to wait until she allowed him a word. Finally, one evening after closing, Emily confronted him. "Why do you keep coming here?" she demanded, her arms crossed tightly. Victor looked up, his eyes heavy with something she had never seen in him before, patience. "Because I owe you more than an apology. You deserve respect, Emily, and I want to prove that I can give it." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Respect from you? The man who humiliated me in front of hundreds." His voice dropped low and sincere. "Yes, I humiliated you, and it was cruel. But you silenced me with nothing but your truth. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Everyone I meet bends, flatters, lies. But you stood there trembling and still sang. You gave me something real." Emily's chest tightened despite herself. She wanted to stay angry, but his words carried no arrogance now, only a broken honesty that unsettled her. "So what, Victor? You think you can erase everything with pretty words?" His gaze held hers. "Not with words, with actions." And true to his promise, his actions began to speak. The next week, Emily discovered that the local community center, where she had once practiced in secret on an old piano, was suddenly renovated, the broken keys replaced, the lights repaired. She asked around, but no one knew who funded it. She suspected Victor, but said nothing. Days later, her mother's medical bills, which had been drowning her in debt, mysteriously cleared. The hospital confirmed an anonymous donor had paid them in full. Again, she suspected him. Still, she refused to thank him, knowing gratitude would feel like surrender. When she finally confronted him again, he didn't deny it. "Yes, it was me," he admitted, "but not for recognition. For you. You told me not to buy you. So I won't, but I can use what I have to remove your burdens." Emily's voice cracked with frustration. "Don't you see? This isn't about bills or buildings. It's about trust. You broke mine in front of the world. Do you know what that feels like?" He flinched. For a man who had stared down boardrooms without blinking, her words pierced deeper than any rival's attack. "I want to know," he said quietly. "I want to learn." His sincerity unsettled her more than his arrogance ever did. She had built walls to protect herself from men like him, and now he stood at those walls, not breaking them down, but asking permission to enter. That night, as Emily walked home, she passed a small crowd gathered outside the diner. They weren't reporters or fans. They were ordinary people, singing together, inspired by her story. An elderly man stopped her, smiling. "You reminded us that courage matters. Don't let them change you." His words echoed in her mind long after she closed her apartment door. Meanwhile, Victor fought his own battle. His board of directors mocked him for chasing a waitress and warned him that his image was softening, that investors would lose confidence. He silenced them with the same cold authority he once used against Emily, but privately he wondered if he was strong enough to walk away from the life he had built. Yet every time he remembered her trembling voice soaring into the chandeliered silence, he knew he couldn't go back. Days later, fate brought them together again at a press conference where Emily had been unwillingly invited. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and Victor strode onto the stage. But instead of stealing the spotlight, he turned it onto her. "This is Emily Carter," he announced, his voice ringing with conviction. "She is not just a waitress, not just a singer. She is proof that dignity and talent exist in every corner of this city, waiting for someone to see them. I mocked her and she silenced me. That is the kind of power money cannot buy." Gasps rippled through the crowd, microphones raised higher, but Victor didn't care. He stepped back, giving Emily the podium. Her knees shook as she stared at the sea of faces, But she remembered the night at the gala, the silence before her voice filled the room. She took a deep breath and spoke. "I never wanted to be here. I never asked for fame, but I will not let mockery define me. My song was not about revenge, it was about courage. And if it inspired even one person to stand when mocked, then it was worth it." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Emily felt not like a pawn in Victor's game, but like a woman standing on her own stage. Victor's eyes shone with pride, but he remained at the edge, no longer the man in control, but a man learning to follow. And Emily, though still wary, saw in him a glimmer of change she hadn't believed possible. But she also knew the real test was not applause, not cleared debts, not renovated halls. The real test was whether Victor could prove his sincerity when the spotlight faded, when there was no audience to impress. Until then, her trust remained guarded. Yet for the first time, she allowed a small spark of hope to burn. The weeks that followed the press conference were unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. Overnight, her life transformed from the quiet anonymity of carrying trays to the chaos of flashing cameras and endless interviews. Strangers called her a star, agents knocked on her door with promises of record deals, and social media crowned her the voice that silenced the rich. Yet for Emily, the noise was overwhelming. She still returned to the diner whenever she could, clinging to its familiar smell of coffee and pancakes, the squeak of old stools, the comfort of being ordinary. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Reporters crowded the windows, fans begged for autographs, and her boss whispered that business had tripled since her story went viral. Emily sometimes wished she could disappear back into the quiet life she once knew. Victor, however, never stopped showing up. Not as the arrogant CEO who once mocked her, but as a man trying to prove himself. He no longer arrived in flashy cars or expensive suits. Sometimes he even came alone without security, dressed plainly, sitting at her counter with a coffee he rarely drank. "I don't want to be Victor Harrington, the CEO, when I'm here," he told her one evening. "I just want to be the man who heard your voice and was changed by it." Emily listened, skeptical, but unable to deny the sincerity in his eyes. She watched his actions more than his words, how he funded music programs in schools under anonymous donations, how he visited the community center without cameras, sitting quietly in the back while children learned to sing. She saw a man trying, truly trying, to be better than the mask he had worn for decades. And slowly, her anger began to melt into something else, something more dangerous, forgiveness. Yet trust remained fragile. She tested him often, pulling away when the world pushed them together, watching if he would still stand by her when no one was looking. And he did. Each time he stayed. One winter evening, months after the gala, Emily was invited to perform at a benefit concert. The stage was larger than anything she had ever seen, the audience stretching beyond the lights, but she walked onto it with steady steps. As the orchestra began, she closed her eyes and let her voice rise once more, stronger than before, carrying not only sorrow, but triumph. When the final note faded, the crowd rose in thunderous applause, but Emily's gaze went straight to the front row, where Victor stood. His eyes shone with pride, but this time he wasn't the center of her story. She was. After the concert, she found him backstage waiting quietly. "You were extraordinary," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "This time I sang because I chose to, not because someone mocked me." He nodded, humbled. "And that choice makes all the difference." Silence stretched between them, heavy with all they had endured together. Then Victor took a breath, his voice low but trembling with vulnerability. "Emily, I've built towers, companies, empires, but none of it compares to the courage I saw in you that night. I mocked you, and instead of breaking, you rose. You've taught me more about strength than any boardroom ever could. And if you'll let me, I don't want to just be the man who changed your life for a moment. I want to stand with you for all of it." Emily's heart pounded. She had guarded herself fiercely, resisting the pull of his presence. But now she saw not the ruthless CEO, but the man stripped of power, standing before her with nothing but honesty. Slowly, she stepped closer. "Victor, I don't care about your money, your status, or your name. I care about the man who sat trembling in silence when I sang, the man who let himself feel again. If that's who you truly are, then maybe there's a place for you in my life." His eyes glistened as relief and gratitude flooded him. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, simple yet powerful, as though sealing a promise neither had spoken aloud. The months that followed proved that their bond was not a fleeting story, but something real. Emily continued to sing, her career blossoming, but she never left the diner behind. It remained her sanctuary, the place where she had once been humiliated and yet found the courage to rise. Victor supported her not with grand gestures, but with quiet presence, learning humility day by day. The world still whispered, some doubting, some envying, but Emily no longer feared their voices. She had found her own, and so the story that began with mockery ended with transformation. A powerful CEO discovered that wealth could not shield him from the truth, and a humble waitress proved that courage and kindness could silence even the loudest rooms. On a quiet evening, as they sat together in the diner booth where it all began, Victor looked at her and said, "You silenced me once, Emily, and I hope you never stop." She smiled, resting her hand over his. "Then listen closely, because this is only the beginning." And as the neon lights of the diner glowed softly against the night, the billionaire and the waitress sat side by side, not as a tale of humiliation, but as a testament to the power of voice, dignity, and love born from the most unlikely of places.